Chris and Chris Talk Movies.
Hello, and welcome back to the podcast. Today, we are going to be talking about the film Timecrimes. And I would normally play the audio of the trailer here, but the trailer that I found online has no dialogue whatsoever. It's all just music, so there's not much point in me playing a minute and a half of fairly generic sounding movie music. Why don't we skip straight to the synopsis, Chris?
All right. So Timecrimes, and this is a Spanish film. So the original title was Los Cronocrímenes. Um, a man accidentally gets into a time machine and travels back in time nearly an hour. Finding himself will be the first of a series of disasters of unforeseeable consequences.
Well, short, sweet, right to the point. Oh, we forgot to introduce ourselves. My name is Chris Ferry,
And I'm Chris Huddleston.
and this is our podcast. So back into it. Yes. So first of all, we probably ought to say there's no way to really talk about this movie without spoiling it. And I appreciate that you were very careful with me in that regard. You're like, oh, it's pretty cool. You ought to check it out. And so I just watched it. I knew it was Spanish language. Obviously, the title is Timecrimes, so we know it's a time travel thing. But I didn't really know more than that going into it. And I think that is the ideal way to see it. So,
For sure. Yeah. I would definitely say, if this is a movie that you're interested in, and we can say now, I like this movie a lot, but just watch it. It's one of these films where the less you know going in, the better.
yeah. So if you haven't seen it and you want to, pause the podcast right now or switch over to something else and go watch the film, Timecrimes. And then come back and listen to us, because starting pretty much now, we're going to pick it apart, and just talking about it starts to spoil it. I really, really liked it. I'm not even sure where to start. I like the way that it gets right into the action without feeling forced. We start off following fairly typical guy, owns a nice house, has a loving relationship with his wife. A couple of weird things, weird phone call. He's sitting out in his, a backyard, and he's just got a pair of binoculars kind of looking around in the woods. He sees some kind of weird stuff up in the trees. You can't really identify what it is. And he sees a young woman in the woods, and she's acting strangely, and it catches her attention. And it ultimately that leads him into the woods, and it begins this interesting web/loop of events that carry out through the whole movie. I never thought it felt boring or stale. With time travel stuff, we're used to the trope of, oh, okay, this particular event, I've seen this now from this angle, and I expect I will see it from another angle. Right? That's the whole point of time loop movies, is to get to play with the kind of Rashomon aspect of, like, how is something perceived from different vantage points, and how does that difference of perception affect the meaning of the event. The performances were terrific. I thought the cinematography was terrific. I find it refreshing to watch foreign films frequently, because it's not familiar faces.
Mm-hmm.
They have different sensibilities often towards things like sex and violence, and what we take for granted in terms of social relationships, than you typically see out of Hollywood. Like, those things conform pretty tightly to a certain set of mores wherever the needle falls on the scale. So it's always nice to see a foreign filmmaker's eye at work. I don't want to blather on. To jump in here. What landed hard for you in this movie when you watched it?
Well, I think so. The director is named Nacho Vigalondo. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right or not. And he was also the writer of this. So this was the second time I had seen this. This came out in 2007, and I would say that I probably originally saw this maybe 2008, 2009, something like that. Whenever it was that it arrived on video here, I watched it back then. I watched it on Netflix. I think immediately when it came to the US, it hit Netflix right away. It's very well crafted. With time travel movies, if I'm sure I'm sure this is another one, if you try to pull things apart too much, it'll unravel. But it's very well crafted. The budget is obviously low, but it's not amateurish in any way. It's very well shot. There are just a handful of characters, and it's a very you're in very limited locations. It's basically where Hector is this main character, and it's where his home is, and then the woods where he sees the woman through his binoculars, or I don't know, maybe a couple hundred yards away or something. And then when he gets into the time machine, there's this some kind of a research facility that is within sight of his house, basically.
Yeah, certainly within a mile.
Yeah, within a mile.
Like not right next door, but within easy walking distance.
Right. And so everything is in it's in these limited locations. I mean, the only buildings in it are his house and then this facility where the time machine is. So, and I like movies like this that are kind of limited, limited characters and limited scope and all that. I think it just works really well with a low budget film. The acting is really good, even though it's they're speaking Spanish, but the acting,
you can tell.
Yeah, right. The acting seems really great in it, and it's a very serious movie, but I found myself it's almost humorous, because this could almost be called like a series of unfortunate events or something like that, because so basically what happens is he sees this woman through the binoculars, and then he sees this man with bandages on his face. Well,
creepy looking.
Yeah, really, really creepy looking, and that scares him. And when he goes up to see what has happened, so this girl is naked, and she's
okay. I'm sorry, I'm going to keep interjecting.
Oh, sure.
He spots her standing there looking at someone he can't see, and he catches a glimpse of the bandaged face.
Yeah.
So already we've got a pretty girl and a sort of a startling / scary visage of another person.
Right.
And then he sees her sort of standing there. It's not clear what's happening. She's standing still, looking kind of off at someone he can't see, and then she takes off her shirt.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So then he it starts to get undressed, and that kind of lands the hook. So he decides he's going to get up out of his chair and go see what's going on.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
So he goes through the woods. He just basically walks through. I don't know if he walks through his yard or if he goes up to the road. I forget how that works. But anyway, he goes up to the woods where the girl is. He sees the girl. She's naked there and unconscious,
or dead.
Yeah.
It was not clear. I think he thought initially she's dead.
Right, and he kind of throws a stick at her to see if she'll move. Well, while he's doing that, this figure comes up behind him and stabs him
in the shoulder.
Yeah, in the shoulder
with a pair of scissors.
Right. So he takes off running, and he winds up at this research facility. And he goes inside and he says this man is chasing him, and there's a guy working in the facility and has
who's actually the director, by the way.
Is he the director? Okay.
Nacho, yeah.
I didn't know that. I've watched this a couple of times and I didn't actually realize that.
Well, I mean, I just looked it up.
Oh, okay.
I mean, I didn't.
Okay.
I just was seeing it on the internet. Anyway,
So there's kind of like a big, I forget what they call it, but there's kind of a big, like a tub or something with a lid, and he tells Hector that he can get in there and hide. And what happens is when he goes, it turns out that it's a time machine. And the figure that he had seen with the bandages, it turns out to be the um, what I guess the future version of himself or the
right.
past version of himself. Um,
Well, he goes back in time, and I'll say when you say low budget, it doesn't it doesn't have a low budget feel to it. There's just for time travel movies, there's no like it doesn't feel like a couple of kids shot this on a handheld recorder.
no, not at
There's
all.
just no effects. So he
Right.
goes in the tank, which sort of closes around him like a clamshell, and there's just sort of a sound, a sort of, whoosh,
Yeah.
and then the tank opens back up, and it turns out he's an hour earlier,
Right.
and the same guy, the same scientist, is standing outside the tank and looks absolutely flummoxed and flabbergasted to see him. And it takes him a minute to connect the fact that he can't get his head around the concept. In a lot of time travel movies, people kind of go, "Whoa," and then they accept it.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was really great in this, that especially on that first jump backwards, he can't get his head around the concept of what has happened.
Yeah. Which is how a person would act in real
It
life.
feels truly natural, right?
Yeah.
And he begins from that point onward to he already has the wound in his arm that we learn he himself has given him. And as he goes through the movie, he just gets increasingly beat up. There's a car accident. He falls and hits his head. There's a
Yeah.
struggle, right? So he ends up having a car accident and getting a pretty good gash in his head. And he unwraps the bandage that he wrapped up around his arm, around his head, and then sort of realizes, oh, I am the bandage man. And it's this wonderful peeling of an onion, because it does feel quite natural. How you're like, well, why the heck would you stab yourself then, right? And all of this stuff sort of falls into place. Accidents happen. He realizes, oh, if I don't manipulate this situation, then the former me isn't going to see it. And his motivation is frequently like, I need to get back to my wife. I need to get to a place where I can undo this weird loop that started happening.
Yeah.
And then in the pursuit of trying to do that, mistakes happen and things get mucked up and things go kind of pear-shaped. And ultimately there are 3 iterations of him, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
And I thought that it was really great fun. There was one place that it felt a little strained to me, and that was, so they get to the bottom of it. The scientist says, look, he observes himself and he realizes that him from an hour ago, the first thing he saw up in the woods was actually him looking back at himself through binoculars, right?
Yes. Right.
And it startles him because he sees himself there with his wife, whom he's passionate about. And he gets jealous. He's like, who's that guy? And he's like, he just can't get his head around the concept of the scientist saying, that's you, you know? So he says, look, no problem. All we have to do is you go in this room that you didn't go anywhere near. Go in this room and wait. And former you will come up here and get in the tank and go back, and that'll be it.
Yeah.
There's a weird little loop in time, and then once you're gone, you can go back home, and that'll be that. And he'll come through it'll just be this little loop in time that happens again and again, and you won't cross your own path. But he can't leave it alone. He calls himself,
Mm-hmm.
and then we realize that's a call that we observed happening earlier in the movie. And worse yet, he he goes down. Doesn't he go down to the house? Now I'm getting confused.
Yeah, he goes down to the house, and the well, because the girl goes to the house, right? Or
Oh,
he thinks she does.
I'm getting all tangled up now. Or
Yeah,
does he see the girl on the way?
I think he sees the girl on the way.
Oh, and then he's coming up the road, and that's when the car accident is this big red truck smashes into the back of his car,
Mm-hmm.
and so now him 2.0 is the guy that runs his former self off the road.
Yeah, and that was
It
funny how
gets
you don't
really
find that. You see the car accident initially where he's in this little white car that he's driving and he gets hit by this red van and you never see
right,
who's in the red van. And then
right,
later he's driving the red van
right.
and purposely crashes into himself.
And I love that it's out of more of a sense of jealousy than it is to conform to the pattern,
Right.
right? There are some things he does, like he manipulates the young woman in the woods because he knows what he saw, right? He knows what he witnessed. So he says, stand there, wait, all right, take off your shirt, right? And I want to come back around to this, but so there are some things that he does to make time fit what he already experienced.
Mm-hmm.
And there are other things he does that seem to be motivated by impulse or jealousy or fear, right?
Yeah.
And I think that is makes this whole thing really interesting because it's not some cabal of otherworldly, like, pale men in fedoras that are manipulating. Nobody's
Mm-hmm.
messing with him. It's some young scientist wanted to get into the machine room and play when he wasn't supposed to be in there, and he created a mess. And the only bad actor, really, in this movie of four performers is the main character. He becomes his own antagonist.
Yeah. Which is
And
really clever.
in all of them, in their attempt to be the singular him, to just the the universe, they get in their own way and come into conflict with each other, and it's just so smart
Yeah.
and well executed, because I really couldn't predict what was going to happen
Oh
next. Like,
no.
obviously, once you get into it and you know the shape of that hour, it's interesting then to be like, well, who turned on the music? And then later in the movie, you're like, okay, this is where he turns on the music, right?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
so it's fun on it's like three-dimensional chess. It's fun on multiple levels, um, to follow we really do follow the first guy mostly throughout the movie, right? Hector 1. We
Yes.
really kind of follow him. Oh, but wait, then it turns out that he wasn't the first one through the thing, right? So he's not actually Hector 1. He's
Yeah.
like Hector 2. We think he's Hector 1 because we started with him,
Yes.
but we discover that he's not the first Hector to come out of the tube. He's actually the second iteration.
Mm-hmm.
It's really rich. And okay, so there are some moral implications, because we get to explore, how each of us acts in our own selfish interest. We get this. There's a point at which we see his wife killed. She falls off a roof,
Yeah, he
but then
accidentally kills her because he grabs her foot. He thinks it's the young woman
right,
on the roof of his house, and he grabs her foot, and she falls and
and then
dies.
he looks down and he sees that it was his wife,
Yeah, it
and
was his wife.
that drives him, and he has this new fervor to like get back and change things so fundamentally that this doesn't happen, right? So that
Mm-hmm.
really adds gas to the whole enterprise. And oh, God, I hate to even spoil such a delicious, strange twist at the end, but how are we not going to do it?
Okay.
So we finally get around to that point where he is the puppet master of that moment. And he is in the house ahead of himself with a young woman. And he puts his wife's coat on her. And it ends up being her.
And he
And I
cuts her
wondered,
hair so her hair looks like his
yes.
wife's hair.
And I wondered, do you think that was the way it always was? Or do you think initially the wife actually died and he swapped it?
I
Or
don't know. I didn't really think about it when I was watching.
I know does stuff really, does it really change? And then of course we get to the big question of like, if we follow him first, how does a time loop happen first? Because if he's seeing things up in the woods that are actually him, how is that possible? If at a certain point in the flow of time, he has never traveled back in time yet. How does he see himself? Yeah. Right? Yeah. So it's mind bending in very satisfying time travel movie ways.
Yeah.
But by the end of it, he is reunited with his wife, and they're sort of just sitting out. She's terrified because she doesn't know what's going on, and they're sitting out in a place that doesn't involve the rest of the action. And they're hearing the young woman fall off and break her neck, and him, the other him, being like, "No," and it's very upsetting and surreal. And so the casualty of all of this is this young innocent woman who was just riding her bike. Like, the presumption, I think, is that everything kind of plays itself out.
Yeah.
But she ends up being the sacrifice to this mistake that was actually instigated by this young scientist who was playing around with a machine he wasn't supposed to be playing around with.
Right. And I wondered, once you get to the end, so it's him and his wife kind of sitting in these lawn chairs holding hands and just sort of looking across the field, and and that's the end. And it's sort of like, in his mind, it's like, okay, this is the happy ending. But I was wondering, by that point, is he insane, basically? I mean, he's been so beaten up, he's been stabbed and in 2 car accidents, and there's all this trippy stuff happening with multiple versions of him. There's going to be there's this dead woman in their yard.
Yes.
And then there's these, what are these? There are these 2 other versions of him running around,
well, that will presumably,
or would they
presumably end up in this timeline. So
okay.
if it solves itself ultimately, because he goes back and then he goes back again, and ultimately he ends up sitting there with his wife. But along the way, this is one of the things that I think works so well about this movie. He's quite literally changed, right? He's deformed by this whole experience.
Yeah.
That started, I mean, I think if you want to, sort of apply a Freudian logic, symbolic logic, it started from a place of lust, right? He's here, he loves his wife,
that's what I was going to ask you about. Is
younger woman, she's clearly sexy and and naked, and that's what he decides. She waits till his wife leaves, and then he goes up in the woods. Not necessarily. The impulse has a lascivious note to it. It's not.
Yeah, you don't necessarily know if like he would attack her or something, but also
but it
it's
gets
like
him on. But he goes, right, and things kind of go south from there. So in some ways, you can look at this movie. Yes, there's a time travel element to it, but it's a metaphor of marriage and the things the things that we go through. What he discovers he wants is this sitting with my wife in our lawn chairs where the movie starts, like just looking out over the peaceful vista we have here. But the impulse to go investigate the pretty young woman leads to a lot of blood, sweat, and tears and hardship.
Exactly.
And changes the relationship forever, right? It's never going to be the same after that. How's he going to explain it to her, right? And he's literally almost unrecognizable from the man he was at the beginning. He's so beat up. So
Mhm.
I love those touches. I love those visual metaphors. And then time crimes, right? You can't really accuse either. There's two male characters, two female characters, the protagonist and then the scientist, and then the wife and the bystander, really.
Yeah.
And you can't really accuse either of the female characters they don't have a lot of agency in the movie. They are acted upon.
Right.
So the time crimes, is it the scientist who messes with forces he can't understand and control? Is it the man who acts on his impulses? And right, I think it's all of the above. I think it's
Yeah.
the actions both men take. Crimes are committed. A woman is dead. A person dies as a result of it. Of the combined actions of these two. Who's ultimately to blame? Can you say the scientist is ultimately blamed for opening this Pandora's box in the first place, or do you say that Hector is to blame because he's the one that cuts her hair and puts on her coat and basically positions her in a place where he knows he's going to fall to her death?
Yeah. Yeah.
Both,
And the women are presented pretty much as total innocents. I mean, you don't really know anything about the wife.
right,
But the girl, goes out of her way to help him.
right.
And I had forgotten, one thing that I had forgotten from the original viewing is I kind of remembered it as her being immediately frightened of him, but she isn't. When she finds him in the car and he's bandaged his face all up and he looks terrible, but she's not frightened or anything. She
She's
immediately,
startled
yeah, she's
because it's,
startled.
but she
Yeah.
doesn't recoil.
No,
Right.
but
She's
she
like, "Are you
immediately wants
okay?"
to
Yeah.
help him. Yeah. Um, so she tries to make a phone call, but she can't get service, and then she gives him water. Um, so yeah, both of them it's definitely the two men who are committing the crimes, per se. And probably Hector the more so because he essentially murders the girl.
Yeah, the scientist you can say is the one who set the whole thing in motion,
Hmm.
but it is really Hector that does all of the doing.
Right. And I agree
Um,
with you that it was him acting on, as you said, this kind of lustful impulse, because he could have said to the wife, "Hey, there's a girl in the woods there with no clothes on. We should go and help her," but instead, like you said, he waits until she leaves and then he goes to investigate on his own.
and the camera, I think that the directing is excellently well done
Hmm.
because I don't think there is, while it's not super didactic in terms of spoon feeding you meaning, it's very clear eyed in terms of what it is choosing to show you. So
Yes.
we see her in the woods. We see that she's attractive. We see she doesn't, as he sees her through the binoculars, she doesn't appear necessarily to be in threat. You think, well, maybe she's meeting a lover in the woods.
Hmm.
Maybe, right? I mean, she's not crying or panicking or shaking, right?
Right.
She just removes her shirt, and it is her allure that draws him into the woods. Um, you know, and again, it's not gross. It's not lascivious. It's like, wow, I want to. He's interested,
Hmm.
and she is strikingly beautiful.
Hmm.
But there's no ambiguity in like, oh, I need to go help her. I think there's a flicker of like him using that as a justification to himself. Again, I think he does a lot of great acting. He's
Yeah.
The other thing I like about it. He's not a particularly handsome guy.
No.
he's a he's a very I would say average looking guy, except he's actually kind of ugly.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's sort of stooped and he's bald and he's got a bulbous nose and a weak chin, and he's a terrific actor. A
Yeah.
very expressive face. But I like that about this too, is that it's not Brad Pitt.
Right. And
He
maybe that was
definitely,
intentional to make him kind of an everyman, because you definitely you don't look at him as a bad guy or anything. It's one of these where you're kind of following along and you're like, oh, don't do that.
Right.
You want things to work out well for him. And something I think you were starting to talk about the camera movements and things. A lot of movies that do the same kind of a thing where they show the same events more than once from a different angle.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly how to describe this and have it make sense, but it seemed like he was very creative with the angles that he showed the second time around on an event. It wasn't like, okay, now I'm going to show everything from this point of view. You know what I mean? It wasn't like they just took all the shots and just showed it from a reverse angle. They kind of they were more creative with that, which I thought was neat to see these same events play out, but in these somewhat kind of twisted ways, if that makes sense.
No, 100%. And I think that the tightrope you walk in this kind of a project is, on the one hand, really spelling it out. Like, get it? It's the black car, it's the black Mercedes with these license plates. And we're very careful so that you notice the custom license plate, so that when we see it again, you're like, aha. So giving it all away. And on the other hand, making it feel completely mysterious and like, what is happening? And I think this really walks the line nicely. A difficult line to walk, because we do start to see stuff that has happened before, and he starts to realize that I'm the one doing this.
Mm-hmm.
And he gets into the head frame where he's trying to think out ahead. Okay, well, if I'm actually the third one, or if I haven't done that yet, where am I going to be? Like, not, it's a little bit of okay, let me try and remember, what did I do? And
yeah, there are times where you can see him thinking, okay, I need to stand in this spot, and I need to be here and do that. You know what I mean? To recreate the events of before.
There's a great bit when we're following the first guy who's snuck up in the woods and trying to see the masked man, and he can't find him, and he can't find him. He's hiding behind trees, and he can't find him, and he's looking through his binoculars, and then he spots him, and he's got his back to him, and he can tell it's him because he sees the scissors in the back of the bandaged head.
Mm-hmm.
And then slowly the guy turns and looks dead at him with his fingers looped around his eyes like binoculars. Like, I see you. And he's like, ah, and he goes running off. And then when it's him, right, he's like, oh, this is the part where I spook myself.
Yeah.
And he turns around and he does it, and nothing happens. And he realizes he doesn't know where the guy is. So he does it like 4 times.
Uh-huh.
And he realizes, I can't. There's a moment where he's like, I'm not in control of this. It happens when it happens. And he sort of takes a deep breath, and I'm going to do it one last time. And he does it one last time, just randomly to nowhere. And then that time he sees himself being like, and go running off down the hill. It's a brilliant moment.
Oh, sure.
Because it throws into highlight how we think we're controlling the sequence events, but it may just be that this time loop, you know what I mean? It plays with, are we self-determination versus, do we really, are we in control at all? Or is it just kind of on rails, and our self-control, self-determination is an illusion?
Yeah. Because it seems like the harder he tries to rework everything, the more messed up it gets.
Yes, sometimes,
yeah,
but not always. And I think that's a very fine line to walk. And I think this movie does a really great job of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I would highly recommend it.
Yeah, the same here. This is it's a very well crafted film. And, it's one of those, just from a filmmaking standpoint, you just kind of look at it and you think, wow, I mean, this would have been, for what was, certainly a small film, just a lot of thought and work went into making this all work out.
We ought to look. We ought to investigate this filmmaker and see what other stuff he's done.
Well, that's the thing. I kind of looked, and he was one that I'm going to look at his IMDb here real quick. He um, he worked on a couple of um, anthologies. One called The ABCs of Death, which I haven't seen, and then another one called VHS Viral, which I haven't seen that either. But those were he did shorts in those, and then he's done some Spanish language stuff. He did a movie called Open Windows with Elijah Wood, which is pretty good. It's not nearly as good as this. And then I think probably his biggest film. I don't know if he was just the writer or if he was the director. Let's see. Oh yeah, he was the director. He did, and there's another one that I haven't seen, Colossal from 2016, which stars Anne Hathaway, where there's this giant monster and it's somehow controlled by her movements. So I think that's kind of the biggest film that he has done. Oh, that has Dan Stevens in it. I didn't know that.
We ought to check
And
that
Jason
out because I
Sudeikis.
remember that came up and I didn't see it and it got
Yeah,
kind
it
of
was.
big.
I was interested in it, but yeah, we should watch that for sure. But he's I believe gone back to some Spanish language stuff maybe. Oh no, his next movie was called Paradise Hills, which came out in 2019, and that stars Emma Roberts. That's another one. That's either on Prime or Netflix right now. That's another one that looks really weird, but is another one that I want to check out sometime.
Cool.
So, but yeah, that one says sci-fi thriller. So I don't really know what it's about, but yeah, definitely Timecrimes highly recommended. It's among the really top time travel films. I think if you're a time travel fan, there's a lot to like with this.
Particularly because it's not all about special effects. It's a concept movie. It's about the concept of what if you could, and what would happen. And again, it's that model of it's a single thread, so that you don't create some new universe, you don't shatter some, you're literally just you could meet yourself and interact and affect things that have already happened. And I think telling a story that basically keeps folding back on itself, it's a tricky mind-bending thing to do. This does it about as well as any of them I've seen,
for sure. Yeah.
And so we both highly recommend it. But just before, because I do need to keep this to be a shorter episode, but the new trailer for the Batman had dropped, and you wanted to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. What did you think?
I think it looks great. I'm excited
Me
to
too.
see it. I'm not a huge DC. I'm a Marvel guy more than I'm a DC guy. But if there's a Superman movie or a Batman movie, I like Jason Momoa, so I watched the Aquaman movie, as ridiculous as it was.
It was pretty bad. I gotta say, I didn't get a lot out of Aquaman, but
I mean, I will watch them. I don't get excited about them in the same way, but this
one I'm excited about. The just the look of it. It looks very gothic. It's funny with the Batman movies. I mean, going back to the '89 Batman, I think every actor that has played Batman, people have complained, before, people, I remember people being outraged that they picked Michael Keaton. He's a comedy guy. How can he be Batman? This is going to be terrible. And, then the movie was great.
Short.
Yeah. And he's short, and, there's a lot of people who don't like Robert Pattinson because of the Twilight movies, which, I've never seen any of the Twilight movies, but
he's a good actor, though.
He's a good actor. And the thing is, for me, the Batman movies that have been bad, the guy in the suit was never the problem. It was other things that were I don't think any of the actors themselves have been bad. Like, for example, George Clooney says, because he was in what most people think was the worst Batman movie. Um, he says, "Oh, I ruined Batman." Well, they could. I mean, he'll never do it now, but
Clearly not.
they could do a Batman movie with George Clooney, and it'd be really fantastic. I mean, because he's a good actor. So and Batman is, the villains are so important in these films that Batman is
Right.
almost a supporting character in his own films, basically. So I like the look of the suit. Looks pretty good. I like the Batmobile that they're using looks basically like a muscle car with like a rocket engine. So it looks pretty cool. I was never a fan of the tumbler in the Nolan movies. I mean, I know, they were trying to go for it was like a military vehicle or whatever, but
Yeah.
the design never really did it for me. But this one looks and the way he looks in it, I don't know if this was intentional. I assume it was, but it made me think of the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, the
Yeah.
silent German. I mean, and I looked it up afterwards, and I was like, "Am I just imagining that?" And there are shots online where so at the end of the trailer they show him, and he has the kind of long hair and the black makeup around his eyes,
Yeah.
and I mean, I can't imagine that they weren't trying to make that look like the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, because the pictures online, that I looked up look exactly like that. So I thought that was kind of a neat little touch.
It's such a beloved character with so many facets to it, and I think you're hard pressed to get all of it into one movie. You
Mm-hmm.
kind of have to pick your angle on it. And I mean, I loved the Tim Burton take on it, the big cartoony take on it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think using Michael Keaton in that was great because he's got those wicked eyebrows, right? He
Yeah.
looks like he looks like a man with secrets. He looks like a man with a lot on his mind. He looks like a man who's capable of some serious mischief.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think George Clooney really lands the Playboy millionaire thing. Like I think a George Clooney Bruce Wayne um, plays better maybe than a George Clooney Batman.
Yeah.
Val Kilmer was Batman for a while, and I think he looks the most like the comic book.
Yeah.
With the kind of he had that
the jaw and everything.
The jaw and the mouth, and it just he looked in stills. He looked Batman-y. He's got an intensity too that I thought worked for what they were doing, although it's not the most memorable of them. And then the Christopher Nolan thing created the whole universe, and I think that Christian Bale was at his best in the bat suit.
Right.
I didn't ever really. His Bruce Wayne always felt deeply uncomfortable to me. Like,
yeah.
His blithe slickness always felt like an act on screen, and I think that was sort of a failing because nobody is supposed to suspect Bruce Wayne, but his Bruce Wayne always seemed really deeply troubled. And I think it's going to be interesting. I know we've only seen the trailer, but Robert Pattinson does Haunted very well.
Yeah.
So, and you see a lot of it in the street. He looks like a man haunted by some serious ghosts. And if Batman is one thing, I mean,
oh yeah,
just some of the giant bat.
For sure. And a couple of things that I've read about this, they're calling it like this is Batman Year 2, so it's not going to be an origin thing where it's like, Batman's just starting out and we're going to see that all over again.
Still kind of getting his sea legs.
Yeah, he's still kind of, new to it, but he's been doing it for a while. And the director has said that one thing that he really wanted to do with this is we have never seen on film the detective Batman. So he said this is it started out with Detective Comics, and this is going to be the first time that we're really going to see Batman as a detective, which sounds that could be interesting.
I think that's great because that's when you start. We didn't even talk about Ben Affleck.
He was fine. None of them none of
he
them were
kind of
bad in my opinion.
no, he kind of fits into the Justice League.
Yeah.
Um, if you're gonna take it in the Marvel direction where you try and make a big team of people, then Ben Affleck is the team player. It's hard to imagine the Detective Comics soloist that is Batman
Yeah.
fitting in with an Aquaman, a Superman, and a Wonder Woman. I think that they are right to explore the individual um, hero lines because Gal Gadot is really owning it as Wonder Woman.
Oh
I
yeah.
think the Wonder Woman 1984 looks like it's going to
There's
be
a new
super
trailer
fun.
for that, which looks really great.
Yeah, yeah, it looks like it's going to be a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
She's great, and the chemistry with Chris Pine is great.
Oh yeah.
And I love Jason Momoa. I really think he's terrific, but I just think the whole property of Aquaman is hard to make exciting on film. It's so stupid. I mean,
Yeah, and I felt like he and Amber Heard had no chemistry in that movie at
right.
all.
I
They
agree.
just and I don't want to get off a side tangent because I know you have to go, but in the middle of that movie, it became sort of like this Indiana Jones adventure thing where they're going and finding
Yeah,
keys or whatever they were looking
yeah,
for, and I don't know. It was. I thought that one was pretty bad.
yeah. It was poor,
I mean,
but
he's fine. I like him. Like you said, he's good. He's fine in the role. I just like to see it, and I hope the next one is a better movie.
and I feel like they haven't ever quite gotten their groove with Superman. I mean, he's such a beloved character, and Henry Cavill,
Yeah, I don't.
he's great.
Yeah, he's perfect for the role. They
He
just
looks
haven't.
perfect. It just
Yeah,
they don't land, and I think that it's hard. Christopher Reeves. I don't know. Maybe I had a little mini stroke there. Christopher Reeves. He kind of nailed it in those movies. Maybe it's just because we were kids,
oh yeah, but I
but he
think
just had
especially
this heart that was like, it's Superman. You really loved him.
you can go back and watch the first couple, and I mean I've seen them, probably in the last decade or so, and they still hold up fair. The effects aren't what they can do now, but yeah, they've talked about recasting Superman, and he's not the problem. It's not the guy in the Superman suit that's the problem. It's the
Yeah, I
what's
don't
going
think
on
it's
around him.
yeah, I don't think it's that Henry Cavill can't. He certainly looks the part.
He
I
looks the
think
part, and he's
you
a
need
great
a
actor.
directorial vision that like they keep trying to take it dark. Like, oh, I'm like, that's not Superman. Yes, he's got sadness, but he's the goody goody. Like that's
And that's the thing, and we've probably talked about this before, that Marvel does so well that DC hasn't seemed to quite figure out is Marvel trusts the source material.
yeah,
They don't try to make the characters something that they aren't. They don't try to put everybody in a black suit. They more or less, they'll change some things a little bit to make it fit the screen better. But for the most part in the Marvel movies, they've pretty much presented the suits the way they look in the comics. And like I say, they don't try to make, they're not trying to make everything dark. With Batman, you can do that. With Superman, I don't think you can.
yeah.
Not every character is going to be a dark, brooding, character.
It
So
almost you have to find what the conflict for Superman is, and to me, I go back again to the Christopher Reeve. It's almost like a politician who there's just too much to do,
mm-hmm.
right? You can't save literally everyone, even if you can fly at the speed of sound, and right, there's just too much trouble going on simultaneously. You can only ever be one place at a time, and the challenge of prioritizing, the challenge, as inane as it sounds, of PR, right? When you're there, you can't just swoop in and save the kid from the building. You have to give the kid a moment of your attention so he can say, thanks, Superman. And you have to accept that
Yeah.
and say, you're welcome. I got to go save your mom now or whatever. Like you have to land it with each person you save, and how
Mm-hmm.
exhausting that would
Oh
be.
yeah.
How driven you'd have to be to commit to that again and again. And then when your girlfriend Lois is in trouble, do I save this little old lady or do I go save Lois? Because frankly, Lois is more important to me, but is that fair? Like he wrestles with this high level moral stuff,
Right.
and making that interesting on screen is the challenge because he's invulnerable.
Yeah.
The villains always manage to find some kryptonite somewhere,
Mm-hmm.
impossibly, but that's his only vulnerability. So that's hard. Instead, they make it like him lovelorn or
Right.
angry, but Superman's not those things.
No. No. Somebody could do it right. And Justice League, it's a it's kind of amazing to me that have they managed to screw it up, because if you had said 20 years ago, what's going to be a bigger hit movie, Justice League or Avengers, I would have said Justice League,
Right.
because everybody knows Superman and Batman, if not Wonder Woman, pretty much for sure. But the Avengers characters, probably just to general audiences, the Hulk was probably the most known character 15
Yeah.
years ago, you
Yeah.
know. And so,
Took them a while to find their way with that character on screen too.
oh yeah, yeah. I mean, the Hulk is tough because he works well in an ensemble, but in an individual film, it's a little tough because it's just, what do you do with him?
I think the Mark Ruffalo casting is the right. I think they landed that well because he's
Yeah.
a good ensemble player and he's funny, but he's also brooding and moody, and
Mm-hmm.
and I thought that worked really well in
The
those
tone is right
versions.
on it. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But this
We
this next Batman, I'm excited for it. I think it looks really good.
It's 2021.
2021. Yep.
Okay. Well, we'll see what
Yeah.
happens next year.
Yeah. Hopefully,
All
we'll be
right,
able
I
to see it
gotta
in the theater.
jump off of here
All
for
right.
tonight. But it has been a pleasure talking with you as always. Thank you for joining
Same here.
us on our podcast. And we have not decided what we're going to do next time. We have talked about maybe coming back around to The Black Hole or Flash Gordon, two favorites from your childhood, as you mentioned to me,
Mm-hmm.
and also from mine, beloved movies.
Yep.
So maybe we'll come back with that. We're going to have to talk about it offline. And until then, go check out Timecrimes. Even if you sat and listened to us spoil it, it's worth a watch. Worth a watch. Worth a watch. Worth a watch.